Our autopracers are powerful, scanning continuously out of our conscious awareness, watching out for the themes and variations of the events that have been relevant to our survival. To use a computer metaphor, the automatic appraising mechanisms are searching our environment for anything that resembles what is stored in our emotion alert database. Throughout life, we encounter new events that may be interpreted by automatic appraising as similar to a theme or variation stored in the database. And when that happens, an emotion is triggered. For the ISTDP student, what you cannot learn from reading a book, attending to unique themes in the triangle of person. Triggers, understanding the need to be case-specific, the importance of psychodynamic links, and what gets lost in premature added pressure, the dynamic formulation and the importance of giving a meaningful context to our clinical work by identifying the unique themes and triggers in the patient's life. The unique themes of the patient's life includes, but also goes beyond, the triangle of conflict, is the yarn with which the fabric of triangle of person interpretations can be made. The therapist should stay with the main relationship theme because it provides a focus which furthers the alliance and sense of progress. The patient responded very affirmatively, for he felt understood. For a presentation that will stress the importance of the need to be case-specific, it only makes sense to begin by reviewing some truncated case vignettes, and then afterwards have a more theoretical discussion. A discussion which will include what I mean by added pressure, as well as a look at criticisms of the approach that I favor. All but one of the case vignettes will be individual patients. The last case will involve looking briefly at a couple in ISTDP-informed couples therapy. Let's start with some introductions. Meet everyone. Antonio. Georgina. Michael. Todd and Ivor. And last but not least, Jeffrey and Stefanie, the two ISTDP therapists that you'll get to know today. Jeffrey is less experienced than Stefanie, also trained differently. So in this presentation, he serves the important but unflattering function of showing us what not to do, though his approach does sometimes work for some patients, mind you, and some actually may prefer his approach over Stefanie's. Stefanie's approach to the patients will demonstrate how to do the foundational work of preparing the ground for a therapeutic landing into the unconscious by creating an effective launching pad from the conscious. Now that you have met everyone, let's jump in. Antonio is in therapy due to his depression, social isolation, social anxiety, and difficulties with relationships. Antonio has a trial therapy session with both Stefanie and Jeffrey. Let's compare and contrast, starting with Antonio's session with Jeffrey. Antonio presents as detached with Jeffrey and highly cerebral and calculated. He presents the same way with Stefanie. Let's look at parts of both sessions to see what we can learn. Again, Antonio is now with Jeffrey. Jeffrey notes Antonio's detachment and intellectualizing. He asks Antonio if being so detached from his emotions could be hurting him and contributing to his difficulties, and if he wants to look at his feelings as an avenue to resolve his problems. Antonio can see that he has a detached relationship to his emotions and agrees, though he's not totally clear on the link between his detachment and his symptoms. Jeffrey proceeds to ask what feelings Antonio has towards Jeffrey that are being covered up by his detachment. Now let's look at a part of the session Antonio had with Stefanie. Antonio presents the same way with her, detached, cerebral. Stefanie notices this, but also notices that in spite of this, Antonio provides relevant and significant information when asked about his symptoms and historical information. As Stefanie gets to know Antonio a bit, she learns that the way he detaches is actually unique based on his history. By conducting a careful inquiry and asking for specific examples of the problem areas, she learns that Antonio has partial success in many areas of his life. He works hard and particularly succeeds in school for a while, until he doesn't. Same with dating and work and friendships. He excels for a while and then drops out of college, for example. He has a few dates, but then the relationships fall apart, and so on. She can see that his ability to work hard will enable him some success in therapy as well. But like in all other areas, if this pattern continues, it will only be a partial success. Stefanie reflects this pattern back to Antonio, who agrees, and so they develop a shared language and shorthand way of referring to this dynamic. Now, with Stefanie pointing out Antonio's detachment, she doesn't just say that he's detached. Instead, she says,
Is this one of those moments, as I ask about your feelings, you detach as a way of ensuring we only have partial success in here together? How would it be for you if you leave here with only partial success, where maybe you get something from our work, but not as much as you could?
like all the other areas of my life? Oh, that would suck. I don't want that. Notice that because Jeffrey followed a more generic route and did not do a careful inquiry into the triangle of person dynamics, but decided instead to do defense identification, actually a more superficial form of defense identification, as he did not see all that really went into Antonio's detachment and pressure toward feeling that he was not able to capture the important dynamic details that Stefanie was able to capture. Notice that Stefanie developed a common language with Antonio based on his actual life experience, and how this helped them work out more of a relationship than Jeffrey and Antonio. Antonio also more readily began to turn against his defenses in his session with Stefanie, which is a prerequisite for a therapeutic unlocking of the unconscious. With Stefanie, Antonio felt seen and understood. These are crucial ingredients in forming a conscious therapeutic alliance. And he can really see the link between the avoidance of his feelings and his life problems, also crucial in a conscious therapeutic alliance. Whereas with Jeffrey, it made intellectual sense to him, but he could not really feel the connection. The unique way in which Antonio detaches, which is going into a self-defeating partial success mode, was completely missed by Jeffrey, and therefore their session was more stilted, generic, and lacked the depth and vibrancy that Stefanie developed by attending to the unique themes in Antonio's life. With Stefanie, Antonio had a meaningful context within which to better understand the therapeutic task and his own experiences. Stefanie's approach established herself in Antonio's mind as someone he could entrust with his most intimate thoughts and feelings, whereas Jeffrey, who was eager to push his own agenda of having an unlocking of Antonio's unconscious, did not establish this level of trust and rapport. As the title of this presentation suggests, Stefanie could not have read a book about the unique themes in Antonio's life. She had to be interested and present with him in order to get to know Antonio. As Antonio's and Stefanie's work deepened, new understandings and insights arose, leading to an ever-deepening and evolving case formulation. Let's turn our attention to Georgina. Her presenting problems include getting involved with men who are controlling and treat her poorly. She allows this, thereby she takes a used and abused position with these men. She's successful in her career and otherwise has a vibrant, satisfying social life with her female friends. Like Antonio, she has a trial session with Jeffrey and Stefanie. It's time to compare and contrast. In her session with Jeffrey, as conflictual material is approached, Georgina giggles and displays similar tactical defenses, such as gaze avoidance. She also sighs from time to time, indicating that her striatal muscle tissue is containing her anxiety, and that painful, emotionally charged, psychic material lurks around the corner. Eager to have breakthroughs, and with the best of intentions, an unlocking of her unconscious, Jeffrey begins to press for feelings and comment on her defensive behaviors. In her session with Stefanie, Georgina presents the same way. She giggles, she sighs, and occasionally slows down her speech. Stefanie comments on Georgina's behavior, but since she's still getting a clear descriptive phenomenological picture of the dynamics associated with the patient's problem areas, she continues with the face of inquiry to get all the mileage out of that face before proceeding to the face of pressure. She's not in a hurry to facilitate an unlocking of Georgina's unconscious. Because Stefanie takes this route, she learns that the patient's mother frequently encouraged the patient to rein herself in and put her lid on her passions, interests, and strong emotions, the P on the corner of the triangle of person. When the relationships with the controlling men in her life are explored in greater detail, the C corner of the same triangle, it becomes apparent that none of them could handle the patient feeling anger towards them. And in fact, in order to stick around, they insisted that she feel bad about herself. Stefanie also learns that the patient lost her father at an early age, and that on the heels of that loss, again, this is the focus on the past, the P, the patient was enraged, mixed with anxiety and defense here, obviously, and she'd get into physical fights with her teen peers. It becomes clear that Georgina associates feeling her anger with her teen experiences of lashing out and getting into fistfights. This is a lack of differentiation between the corners of the triangle of conflict. All of this information was greatly illuminating and helped Stefanie facilitate a foundation for the face of pressure. Let's look at what this actually looked like.
I am afraid of anger, I am telling you. I can be mean. I got into fights all the time when I was a teenager. I was so angry after my father died. I took it out on those around me. So you mean there's a vicious animal inside of you? There is. Like all teenagers, that kind of rage would be developmentally very hard to deal with. So you got anxious and acted out. Right. At that time, did anyone treat you badly? Never. No one would dare. And now men treat you badly, left and right, and you just feel bad about yourself and stick around. Is it not? Ugh, see, how sad. Indeed, what if we can welcome back your inner 13-year-old, but this time with an adult woman in charge who can handle the rage, the vicious animal? That sounds good. I don't want to lose control. So, what we're working towards together is not fistfights this time, but an ability in you to feel your anger on the inside, and then simply let people know when they treat you badly that you are angry and that their behavior is unacceptable. How does that sound to you? I love it.
My ex could never handle that. He would not stick around, so I may lose some people in the process, but I think that would leave me open to meeting people that can handle my feelings.
Georgina's unconscious had been primed and put on notice, if you will. She sees the connection between getting involved with men that cannot handle it when she's angry and insists on her feeling bad about herself as a prerequisite for sticking around, and her mother encouraging her to put a lid on her feelings. This is the PC, or the past current link, on the triangle of person. The idea that there's a distinction between what she thought of as anger and actual anger has been introduced, and anger has been understood to be a force that, when handled with adult capabilities, can set her free from the pattern of taking a used and abused position with men. There is now a clear, personally meaningful context for Georgina where the hard work of facing her feelings and confronting her defenses can be placed. Georgina became compliant in her session with Jeffrey. Jeffrey became another man in her life who took charge, which Georgina allowed by becoming a passenger, just like she would with the controlling men that she would date. This malignant dynamic was undermined in her work with Stefanie, because Stefanie had a very precise understanding of what triggers the patient's feelings. Stefanie also got more mileage when she did begin to press for feelings. With more precise understandings in place, Stefanie could say, "So this incident at the swimming pool with your ex, another iteration of someone rudely trying to control you. What are your feelings towards him?" The precise understanding of the theme that triggers Georgina helped to boost and more optimally mobilize the patient, whereas when Jeffrey asked about the patient's feelings towards him outside a clear context that really made sense to the patient, the outcome was less than optimal. Stefanie's focus on getting a broad overview and analysis of the triangle of person deepened and refined the formulation, where it eventually became clear that another key characteristic of the controlling men she would get together with was that they had emotionally abandoned her before there even was a real relationship. And getting involved with men like this allowed her to avoid her feelings towards her father, who abandoned her by dying. This way of working lays a sturdy foundation for a triangle of conflict links to be made on the triangle of person, the TCP links, as it involves an in-depth understanding of the nuanced and unique themes of the patient's life. One could say that the unique themes of the patient's life is the yarn with which the fabric of triangle of person interpretations can be made. Jeffrey had reasoned that he was here to work with the patient's unconscious, and so he did not need to really bother with a thorough inquiry. An approach, by the way, that perhaps works for him in some of his cases. In this case, however, it was Stefanie's slow and steady approach of really bringing the patient along with her that won the race in the end. And though many books have been very helpful to Stefanie, no book that Stefanie read or could read gave her the ability to tune into the unique themes of Georgina's life. Then there is Michael. For the sake of brevity and giving Jeffrey a break from having his shortcomings underscored, let's summarize the key point with Michael. Michael presented to therapy for depression, isolation, social anxiety, and a great deal of interpersonal disturbances connected to a habit of being dishonest. As usual, his work with Stefanie took off the ground, whereas his work with Jeffrey did not. Michael grew up in a broken, abusive home where he was caught in the middle of a nasty custody fight between his parents. Michael remembers a specific instance where a police officer came to his house where he lived with his mother, responding to a neighbor's complaint about how something seemed off in the household. Michael recalls being petrified when the police stood in their hallway. With all the custody fights, he knew that if he said the truth to the police officer, his painful but predictable life with his mother could be upended. Again, for the sake of brevity, we will speed through just some of the key interventions and interactions that helped Stefanie turn a corner with Michael. They included
facing the truth as a kid was a threat to the survival of your family, so I understand that. You have suggested that you are feeling that way in here.
That's right.
And that part of you has never had a voice, has it?
Never.
The policeman was there to help you. And what I think we are coming to is that I am in the same position as the policeman.
Yeah, I do have the same sensation with you as I did when the police came in. Like, really scared.
I am not here to hurt you. But back then, the truth was dangerous to your sense of stability. So in here, as I invite you to look at the truth of your feelings and your life, you are understandably having a negative reaction to that.
Right.
Just like the policeman, I am also experienced as a threat to you, even though I have good intentions. This is an old pattern that we have recreated together.
With this, Stefanie helped Michael understand himself better and began to differentiate the past from the present, Stefanie from the policeman. And she helped Michael understand the reason for his very conflicted relationship with the truth. These formulations and understandings get lost when the therapist jumps into the face of pressure prior to exploring the unique themes in the patient's life. A thorough triangle of person analysis. Lastly, let's look at Todd and Ivor, a homosexual couple wanting ISTDP-informed couples therapy. They have a trial session with Jeffrey and Stefanie. Todd and Ivor present with interpersonal conflict where they go for long periods of not relating to each other, and Todd sometimes exploding on Ivor in the context of perceiving slights and feeling neglected. Ivor reports that he sometimes is passive-aggressive. Both Jeffrey and Stefanie run into the same troublesome dynamic. In session, Ivor readily sees his role in their problems, but Todd is wishy-washy, and when the focus is Todd's anger, he vacillates from acknowledging his role and his desire to address his role to blaming his behaviors on his brain chemistry, stating that there's nothing he can do about it. Jeffrey fails to recognize how insidious, malignant, and egocentric this defense is, and he overestimates the therapeutic alliance with Todd to address his emotions in the context of couples therapy. And so when Todd begins to engage in his vacillating behavior, Jeffrey takes the approach of repeatedly asking what feelings are coming up here that are being covered up by the behavior. This, of course, goes absolutely nowhere. Though, again, with other patients at other junctures, this is, of course, a fine intervention. Clear-eyed Stefanie takes a different approach with Todd and Ivor. She sees the malignant nature of Todd's defensive structure and how the couple's therapy will not go anywhere at all until Todd's defensive, treatment-threatening maneuvers are dealt with head-on. Stefanie to Todd, as he switches from an agreement that he has a role in the couple's problems that he wants to deal with, and it relates to how he deals with his emotions, to the idea that there is nothing he can do about it because of his brain chemistry.
You just pulled the rug out of our session. You just blew off our common agreements in here. Is this what you do when you are angry?
Todd remains silent with a smug look on his face.
You have gone back on what you said before. You're not being consistent, and now you are unresponsive.
How do you mean, though?
You said before that working on being emotionally intimate was important to you and that you wanted to work on it. And now that you are mad, you just pulled the rug out and totally reversed your position. So how is it for you that Ivor cannot count on you to do what you say you're going to do? That you can have a bad day and take it all back?
Well, I don't know if I even care.
You have reversed your position. Last session, you said you wanted to change how you deal with your feelings so you'd be less depressed and more connected to Ivor. And now you do not care, so you are not consistent.
Okay. Yeah.
What changed? Here we were working, we had an agreement, and you assured me that this is something that was important to you, and now you could care less. It's not important to you, and you're back to saying it's chemical. So you're all over the map. This means I cannot reliably have confidence in anything you say because it keeps changing. Is this just with me that things keep changing, or is this with others too?
This is how he is with me, too. Yeah. Well, I think you're right. This is how I am when I'm pissed off.
Is this how you want to be dealing with your anger, ensuring that no one can count on what you say?
And so from here on out, the couples therapy treatment begins to turn a corner and gain traction. Todd had to first really see his defense, its function, its destructiveness, and he then needed help to be turned against this defense through clarification, challenge, and some pressure on his will. Jeffrey's approach of pressuring toward feelings coming up accomplished neither of these tasks. Jeffrey was focused on a generic roadmap where pressing for feelings was his default response to seeing higher order defenses and striated signaling. Stefanie's understanding of what needed to be done hit the mark, and her ability to accurately see this came from being present with the couple and not being attached to generic roadmaps and rote techniques. In this case, the underlying themes could not be explored because of the highly destructive defensive behavior of Todd. One could say that the theme was self-sabotage via this particular defense, and Stefanie recognized that this had to be dealt with first and foremost if the treatment was ever going to take off the ground. It is to seeing what is happening with the client in any given moment and responding accordingly that makes the patient feel seen, an important element in forming and maintaining a conscious therapeutic alliance. The triangle of person often gets far less attention than the more sexy triangle of conflict, but hopefully these vignettes demonstrate the importance of attending to the unique themes that often relate to the patient's triangle of person and form the stimulus to feelings and impulse. This wraps up the application and case vignette part of this presentation. For those academically minded and intellectually curious, I invite you to stick around for a few minutes to allow the concrete, case-specific learning to reverberate into more of a conceptual discussion, and a look at how the ideas that we've reviewed in the application section show up in some of the literature that pertains to the topics at hand. Criticisms. As a big believer in the importance of leveling and receiving criticism, I want to note common criticisms of the approach that I favor, as demonstrated by Stefanie. A point of view exists that being meticulous about getting a strong conscious therapeutic alliance and a thorough triangle of person analysis is not necessary if we simply work on getting a high rise of complex transference feelings, work on mobilizing the transference component of the resistance, TCR, and activate a strong unconscious therapeutic alliance through pressure, working with the unconscious, not so much the conscious. And the information learned prior to unlocking can be learned post-unlocking of the unconscious, and the material will then be more reliable. I imagine the approach that these critics favor works well for some patients, and may be optimal for different therapists based on their temperaments and personalities. The bottom line is, if your approach gives you good results with your patients, then continue with your chosen approach. What I am discussing in this presentation is an approach that works for me. I also want to underscore that in order to maintain and strengthen the conscious and unconscious therapeutic alliance, extensive pressure is often very important. More on what I mean by extensive or added pressure in just a minute. So, what are some important take-home points in terms of what we just saw? We do not get bogged down in defense work until those defenses get in the way of the therapeutic process and a clear phenomenological understanding of the patient's problem areas. We get all the therapeutic mileage we can get out of the inquiry phase before moving on to the next phase. Stefanie's approach is conducive to the all-important conscious therapeutic alliance, which needs to be in place before much or added pressure should be introduced. There are, of course, cases where pressure plays a role in creating a conscious alliance, and undoubtedly, pressure very often plays a large role in maintaining and strengthening both of the alliances. Stefanie's approach also makes her a figure in the patient's life that the patient would more readily want to open up to. Though in fairness, of course, some patients may take better to Jeffrey's approach. Stefanie's approach also helps her to more effectively boost feelings and mobilize the patient's unconscious, as she has very clear and precise understandings of the patient's triggers. With notable exceptions, most notable exception being that we do want to ask about feelings as a way of experientially demonstrating the link between avoidance of affect and symptoms. We do not ask much about feelings until feelings are clearly near the surface, about to break through the repressive barrier. The patient has to turn against her defenses. And this is often not as easy as casually suggesting that a defense could be working against the patient before a truly effective focus on affect can take place. What about the psychoneurotic spectrum and systems of resistance? Why was there not a focus on what systems of resistance the patients were in and where they fell on the psychoneurotic spectrum, you might ask? First, gauging the patient's response to an inquiry into the nature of their problems and their response to interpretations and observations is the first step in getting a clear psychodiagnostic picture. And when the patient is able to provide meaningful and emotionally charged material, that suggests a higher ego adaptive capacity. Stefanie determined that all the patients, except for Todd, were sufficiently responsive for an extended inquiry where some formulations and understandings were achieved. Only with Todd in couples therapy was this avenue not accessible. From this perspective, the only psychodiagnostic criteria that was relevant was whether or not the patient was sufficiently engaged and responsive for this kind of an exploration. Second, working towards seeing and understanding the unique themes in the patient's life applies across the spectrum of psychoneuroses, and the only times we would need to change course is if someone is so highly resistant and disengaged that it interferes with attending to these kinds of details and themes in the patient's life. Defenses here interfere to such an extent that any information gathered is unreliable. When patients share information from a very non-involved place, or they do not declare a clear problem to work on, for example, Todd met both of these criteria. In instances like this, we would need to address the resistance according to the needs and capacities of the patient first. The other instance in which we would not proceed with the kind of inquiry that has been demonstrated would be if the patient's anxiety is too unregulated and above therapeutic thresholds, though in many cases, approaching the patient the way Stefanie does naturally regulate anxiety that is in need of regulation. What exactly is meant by premature pressure? Premature pressure refers to when the therapist uses added pressure before the patient has an understanding of how looking at his or her feelings relates to the presenting problems. and before the therapist has established him or herself as someone the patient would want to open up to. As the case vignettes demonstrated, having at least a beginning of a psychodynamic formulation that can serve as a meaningful context for the patient to better understand his or her experiences as well as the therapeutic task is very important. It also sets the stage for more effective pressure, as we then have a more precise understanding of what mobilizes feelings in the patient. Premature pressure does not refer to a specific time frame. Sometimes the proper foundation for pressure can be created within the first 2 minutes of an initial session, and in other cases, several sessions can be needed before added pressure makes sense. Reflections on my personal distinction between pressure and added pressure. This is a conceptual framework and a terminology that I find helpful and user-friendly for myself and my students, though it may not at all line up with orthodox or mainstream ISTDP taxonomies and nomenclature. Though there is inherent pressure built into any endeavor that in a focused way seeks to find the emotional truth of things and get to the bottom of neurotic suffering and psychological disturbances, Dr. Davenlew, in developing intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy, found a way to capitalize on therapeutic effects of pressure, and he developed many interventions that include a kind of added pressure on top of the inherent pressure involved in any focused, truth-seeking endeavor. Pressure seems to exist on a continuum, with mild, inherent forms of pressure present in asking the patient what problems they want help with and seeking clarification, to more intense forms of pressure at the other end of the continuum. In his seminal book, Unlocking the Unconscious, in 1990, in the section titled Pressure Toward Feeling, Dr. Davenlew first describes pressure as clearly intertwined with inquiry, with examples such as seeking clarification, and soon thereafter questioning the patient about their emotions. Davenlew writes, quote, "The stage of pressure toward feeling begins. This starts with simple requests for elaboration. Can we look at that? Can you say more about that?" At page 4. In the same part of the book, he appears to point to the underlying spirit of what he means by pressure. The section I will quote is descriptive and does not offer a clear-cut definition. In fact, it appears as though Davenlew preferred offering examples and descriptions over definitions of the concepts and interventions he spoke of. Quote, "A few examples will have to suffice to convey their quality and flavor." Page 5. Anyway, here's the quote that seems to capture the underlying spirit of what Dr. Davenlew means by the term pressure. All these questions are seemingly innocent and straightforward, but in fact they convey a powerful hidden message, namely that the therapist wishes to understand any given situation in depth, wishes to know exactly what the patient experiences, and will not be put off by evasions and half-truths. The patient picks up on this message very quickly, and sooner or later, usually sooner, become unconsciously alarmed that his most painful areas are going to be investigated. Page 4. Some define pressure as an encouragement for the patient to do something good for him or herself, perhaps with Davenlew's famous "be good to yourself" lines in mind. I categorize the inherent pressures of seeking psychotherapeutic help, requests for clarification, and invitations to be specific as mild forms of pressure. And I categorize what I call added pressure as asking more than once in a short time frame about what a patient is feeling, wanting, and is willing to do to get better. typically with a bit of a forcefulness in the vocal tone on the part of the therapist. Some may refer to this as stacking pressure. Asking repeatedly about what emotions the patient experiences underneath their symptoms, and asking about what emotions the patient experiences towards the therapist, and pressuring the patient to do something to overcome resistance against facing their emotional truth are common examples of the kind of pressure that is often associated with ISTDP. These are all examples of what I call added pressure, especially if there's a forcefulness in the therapist's voice. Davenlou's frequent use of comments with a stern, forceful tone, such as, "Why do you want to cripple yourself like this? Why fight your feelings? What are you going to do about this crippled man?" also comes to mind when thinking of added pressure. Davenlou describes these interventions with the phrase, "pressure to give up defenses," on page 6 of Unlocking the Unconscious. In a spirit now of tentative exploration, turning to Catherine Hickey. Writing about multidimensional unconscious structural changes, Musk, Catherine Hickey, in her book Understanding Davenlou's Intensive Short-Term Dynamic Psychotherapy, published in 2017, in a chapter titled Davenlou's Discoveries, 2005 to 2015, an overview of important terminology and teachings. Quote, simply stated, Musk refers to various steps of the central dynamic sequence to achieve long-lasting change in the patient's unconscious emotions, anxiety, and defensive organization. End of quote. She goes on to submit the idea that working in this way often, quote, makes the unconscious material more conscious, end of quote, and that, quote, the therapeutic task becomes clearer, end of quote. She goes on to state that many therapists attempt to apply this after an unlocking of the unconscious, and that this is a mistake, that, quote, Davenlou has renamed this phase, quote, the phase of psychoanalytic investigation of the unconscious, end of quote. Hickey goes on to state that this phase, quote, should be applied throughout the interview and from the beginning, page 21. Though we would ultimately need to ask the author, and my assumption here could be completely wrong, I do believe that what she's referring to is akin to Stefanie's approach of preparing the ground or a foundation for a therapeutic landing into the unconscious by creating an effective launching pad from the conscious. Stefanie worked in a spirit of psychoanalytic investigation indeed. In the same book, authored by Hickey, she includes transcripts, extensive, from Davenlou's closed-circuit training program in Montreal. In this controversial program, trainees work with other trainees to unlock each other's unconscious, and Davenlou often steps in and helps trainees unlock their unconscious by typically working very vertically with them, meaning frequent use of unremitting pressure and challenge until the unconscious unlocks. What strikes me about these transcripts is that in spite of the unremitting pressure and challenge that soon is exerted upon the trainee, Dr. Davenlou usually begins the interview with a series of investigations related to intricate family dynamics and events from the trainee's childhood. The level of detail is striking and not dissimilar to the kind of detail that Stefanie got. After the unlocking of the unconscious, Davenlou appears to refer back to what was learned at the start of the interview, tying the material that emerged in the unlocking of the unconscious to what was discussed at the onset of the interview. The metaphor of launching pad from the conscious and landing strip in the unconscious again comes to my mind. In line with working with symptoms within a greater context, and asking detailed questions to get specific and unique information. Dr. Patricia Coughlin's words also come to mind. In her book, Maximizing Effectiveness in Dynamic Psychotherapy, published in 2017, in the chapter on case conceptualization, Dr. Coughlin writes, information regarding the precipitants to the symptoms and disturbances contains dynamic significance and helps us form hypotheses regarding the nature of the underlying disturbance to be addressed. This is the essence of a case formulation that makes sense of the patient's problems while providing a rationale for treatment. Page 22 and page 23. A few lines from Nancy McWilliams' book titled Psychoanalytic Case Formulation, published in 1999, also come to mind, as they appear to at least be in the neighborhood of what has been discussed. Quote, I had rarely in my training been encouraged to work inferentially, to open myself up to a creative process fueled by intuition, to feel my way into another human being's intimate life and formulate that person's suffering in a way that would express his or her unique categories of subjective experience, rather than the pre-formatted, objective categories of received diagnostic wisdom. It seems to me self-evident that unless one understands someone's unique personal subjectivity, one cannot infer the best treatment approach for that individual. A dynamic formulation is only the roughest kind of mapping of someone's individuality, but it is essential to have some kind of map before we invite a person into a terrain where both parties could otherwise get lost. Any school of thought that wishes to thrive needs to be receptive to criticism. In that spirit, I want to end this presentation with openness to criticism. In the New York Times article titled A New and Controversial Short-Term Psychotherapy, published in 1982, written by Dava Sobel, the author cites Dr. George E. Gross, then medical director of the treatment center at the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. Dr. Gross compares short-term dynamic psychotherapy to psychoanalysis and offers the following criticism of short-term dynamic psychotherapy. It's the difference between an archeological dig and a treasure hunt, Dr. Gross said. That's not to say that people are not rewarded by the things they find on a treasure hunt, but if you're an archaeologist, you're interested in something else. Psychoanalysis has the potential to uncover an entire civilization. Dr. Gross also said that the confrontational tactics used by Dr. Davenlu create an atmosphere that may interfere with the work of self-exploration. You can't carry out an archaeological dig in the middle of an earthquake, he went on. I submit that Dr. Gross was onto something. All methods can be misused or applied poorly. Ask Dr. Davenlu, and he of course had some concerns about psychoanalysis proper. One of the potential pitfalls of ISTDP not carried out well is the treasure hunt phenomenon, represented by Jeffrey's approach. Stefanie's focus on steadfastly bringing the patient along and on the unique themes in the patient's life prepares the patient for the, quote, earthquake of, quote, more confrontational tactics, but to my thinking, also helps her patients get a view of the civilization, though it would be difficult to gauge what uncovering an entire civilization really entails. In this presentation, I hope I have made a case for how much of doing ISTDP is about being present and attuned to the unique facets and themes of our patients' lives, and how this is something we cannot learn from reading a book. I also hope I have demonstrated what can get lost when we prematurely engage in added pressure interventions, and how crucial it is to have a meaningful frame and context from within which the patient can understand the therapeutic task and her own experiences.